Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is October 8th, and there are a lot of interesting news stories. So, in this episode, Ukrainian drones are already over Siberia. Putin gives an urgent order to protect key facilities. Trump is once again disappointed in Putin, and Russians themselves say that there is no longer any momentum between Russia and the US. As they say, the love is gone, and also about how Erdogan stabbed Putin in the back. Another blow. Turkey is moving towards rejecting Russian gas. There will be a lot of interesting things about this and more, including how Putin failed his Soviet Union 2.0 project. So if this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. Now, Russia is calling on the US to take a sober and reasonable approach to the issue of supplying Tomahawks to Ukraine, said the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation Rehabilitation. He says that the momentum for a Ukrainian settlement, which supposedly appeared after the Putin-Trump meeting in Alaska, has now been exhausted. Momentum? Was there some kind of momentum in Alaska? So Putin didn't accept Trump's proposal, not even for a temporary ceasefire. Then Vice President Vance, followed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, declared that Russia is refusing bilateral negotiation formats with Ukraine and also trilateral talks involving the US. Meanwhile, Putin launches the most massive shelling of Ukraine in the entire history of this war. He launches over 800 drones in a single night. He intensifies the hybrid war against NATO countries, sends 20 drones into Poland, and regularly violates the airspace of NATO states. And on top of that, drones start terrorizing European countries. And it turns out this was the impulse after the meeting in Alaska. Oh, and by the way, Putin's summer and autumn offensive also failed. I think this is actually the key reason why he started acting so ruthlessly, taking risks, going all in some cases. So that was the impulse, right? I don't know why the shriveled macho lost his drive, but it's definitely there were no relations with the United States at all. If the impulse was negative, then yes, I agree. But what about Trump? And what does Donald Trump have to say in response to this? And Trump said that Putin is disappointed. For the 8th time, by the way, they've already counted. For the 8th time, Donald Trump is disappointed in Putin. During a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House, Donald Trump stated that ending Russia's war against Ukraine might turn out to be more difficult than achieving peace in the Middle East. There he said the deal is already basically on the table. And I quote Donald Trump, "This is madness, just madness. I thought this would be one of the easy cases. I have a good relationship with Putin. And I thought this issue could be resolved. I am very disappointed in him because I thought this would be easy to resolve. It turned out not to be easy, but actually difficult," Donald Trump stated. And he stated that according to his information, by the way, he has been adding this figure lately. According to his data, 7,812 people died last week in Ukraine due to the fighting. There must be some round number, I don't know. Trump has to be concerned 10 times, and then he triggers the sanctions mechanism. Donald Trump has to be concerned 10 times. Putin has to be dissatisfied. So 8 times have already happened, 20 more to go. What's the reason? I don't quite understand. Also, when Trump mentions this number, 7,812 in a week, that means more than 1,000 people are dying per day. And then this phrase, "I'll give Putin 50 days, sounds completely different. I don't know, 40 days, 70 days. You just multiply it by 1,000. It's not, "I'll give Putin 50 days, but rather, "I'll let him kill another 50,000 people. Completely industrial. But why? Trump also adds that a lot of people are dying to show that this is a war. Moreover, he himself said that Putin is killing people absolutely senselessly. So you could stop this tomorrow, today. A month ago, you could have stopped it with sanctions. Well, Trump is dissatisfied. Putin says that Putin is killing, just like that, 1,000 people a day, he says, and that Putin's economy is in a deplorable state. He says that without money, Putin won't be able to wage war. That's the logic. He calls Putin a paper tiger and says he will act from a position of strength. He says he has devastating sanctions in his desk to deprive Putin of money for the war. And then he stops there and doesn't impose the sanctions. Well, at the moment, the most serious blow to the Russian economy is actually being dealt by Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries. The fuel crisis is intensifying, and accordingly Russia is receiving less and less for its military budget. And someday I will get to the truth. I talk to my American colleagues trying to understand. Maybe someone knows. When Ukraine began successfully targeting Russian oil refineries a year and a half ago, the administration of Joseph Biden strictly forbade them from doing so. They said that global prices would become volatile and something terrible would happen. By the way, how are things now, after Russia lost 40% of its refining capacity? Are global prices volatile or not? Or has no one in the world noticed anything? In my opinion, everyone is rubbing their hands in anticipation. Russia is trying to dump additional volumes of crude oil on the market because it can't process it itself. It's buying fuel from China, from India, and has quadrupled its purchases from Belarus. And everyone is happy. Russia is giving away oil at bargain prices. And they can sell petroleum products back to them made from their own oil. Looks like Putin played too much Monopoly as a kid. Just look at what a businessman he is. And Ukrainian drones are becoming an increasing problem for Russia. Just recently, an event occurred that left some people in Russia a bit shocked. For the first time since the war began, drones have reached Siberia. And in Russia, people started to wonder, how could this happen? Even more than 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, sites are not protected. The fact is, they once thought that nothing could ever reach there, not even the strategic aviation airfields, but it turns out things can actually get there. And so, on the night of October 7th, according to Russian authorities, 3 drones were shot down over Tyumen as they were heading toward a major oil refinery. Well, that's the official version from the Russian authorities, but locals published footage of 2 powerful explosions and of dozens of ambulances and fire trucks rushing toward the large refinery in the Antipino area. Dozens of ambulances and fire trucks, apparently just to collect the debris, judging by everything. So the drones crossed the Urals and reached Siberia. There you have it. In Russia, they immediately started blaming everyone. Even Kazakhstan, they claimed the drones were launched from there. But there is another, more plausible version, that Ukraine tested new drones with a range of over 2,000 kilometers. So, the Russian Federation is simply physically unable to protect its military, energy facilities, oil refining, and gas processing industries. They are incapable. And with the range now exceeding 2,000 kilometers, it's absolutely impossible. And it's not just drones, by the way. Lately, there have been more and more videos showing missiles striking targets on Russian territory. Ukrainian missiles. So, this probably isn't the kind of war Russians imagined, but war always comes back to where it started. And let me remind you, friends, we have an important fundraiser for the 101st Brigade. We're raising money for the termite ground robotic systems. These unmanned evacuation vehicles help save the lives of our soldiers and medics because a wounded fighter can be evacuated from the battlefield without medics or transport having to go out to them. So right now, ground evacuation vehicles are a very necessary and important thing. I ask you to support this fundraiser. In this case, your donation truly saves lives, and for that I always say a huge, huge thank you. The donation details are in the description of this video. In the first comment, if for some reason you don't see them, maybe you're watching on another channel, here is the QR code. It leads directly to the fundraiser. I want to emphasize again, every time we deliver essential equipment to our soldiers, they say a huge thank you. But I tell them, no, don't thank me. This is from all of us to you. A huge thank you. We are grateful to you for defending the country, for protecting Ukrainians. So let's help. It so happens that our support, yours and mine, help is needed too. And together we are a tremendous force. You know that. We have already done many good and kind things. Once again, I want to say a huge thank you for that. Russia will impose travel restrictions on diplomats from unfriendly countries that decide to restrict the movement of Russian diplomats within the Schengen area. Let me remind you, there is such an initiative. Everyone knows that a Russian diplomat is an officially registered Russian spy. That's why they decided not to let them roam freely around the entire Schengen area without permission. They decided to restrict their stay only to the country where they are accredited, where they work. If they want to travel to a neighboring country, they must obtain or notify the local authorities. And of course, they're not happy about this, because then who's going to deliver cash in diplomatic cars for all sorts of shady dealings? And not just cash, by the way, there's plenty of other things too. So in response, they decided to impose mirror measures and restrict the movement of diplomats from those countries that introduced these restrictions. So you won't get to see Scisran, you devious Anglo-Saxons, you won't get to experience this, the depressive hopelessness of Norilsk, or get into a knife fight in Cherepovets. All of that will pass you by. Well, so how are Russian spies supposed to travel around the Schengen area now? Maybe you should form your own spy union, go protest. After all, that's how things are done in Europe. And in general, Russians have been advised to ban vacations in Turkey and trips to Europe. Russian citizens should be deprived of the opportunity to visit NATO countries since they sponsor Ukraine. This initiative was put forward by some representative of the Veterans of Russia movement. Wonderful. That's fantastic. It's just super. Turkey is a NATO member indeed. NATO is buying weapons for Ukraine. So how do Putin's followers even manage to spend money in NATO countries, huh? Oh, let me tell you how. In Spain, 5 villas belonging to the head of Russian helicopters were seized in a money laundering case. Spanish authorities have seized the property of one of Rostec's top managers, the head of Russian helicopters Nikolai Kolesov, on the island of Mallorca. The total amount is 18 million euros. Yes, it's quite telling, really. Almost all the so-called patriots who are at the trough in Russia own property in the hated West. And as the propagandist Solovyov, whose 2 villas on Lake Como were seized, once said, patriotism is not a travel ban. See how it is? They don't want to vacation on the filthy beaches in Russia. They want villas on the Côte d'Azur in Spain, Italy, or France. They want their children to study in Britain or the US. They want their families to live in safe Europe, but who can guarantee them safety in Russia? And they want their money to be kept in Belgium or Switzerland. See how they are? That's what a modern Russian patriot looks like these days. Well, really, patriotism is just a business project. You praise Putin, you sing at Police Day, you sing at Army Day, and you get to feed at the trough. Of course, they all prefer to vacation abroad, but who wants to see the faces of their fellow countrymen? That's why no one is willing to go die for the motherland, for Putin, for free. Putin says they're fighting for the motherland, defending their land, but no one is willing to go for free. They have to raise the payments every month for those who go to war. And Putin, who believes that the collapse of the USSR was the greatest catastrophe of the era, will never build a USSR 2.0, even though he would very much like to. After 25 years in power, Putin's ideological construct has completely failed. It was built around surrogate values, nostalgia for the USSR, rising from our knees, fake patriotism, and so on. The USSR 2.0 project has completely failed. What Putin is now trying to piece together and fill with some kind of ideology, it's too late. In the USSR, ideology was a system. In Russia, it's pure window dressing. In the USSR, there really was a genuine ideological hierarchy. It followed the logic of serving communism, sacrifices for the motherland, equality, a bright future, and so on. All of this was reinforced by culture, literature, and education. It permeated everything, both vertically and horizontally. But most importantly, this ideology was mandatory for everyone, from the minister to the worker. But in Putin's Russia, the elite do not live in the country they are supposed to defend. They don't live there. In fact, they live exactly where, according to their own views, their propaganda, apparently that's where the greatest evil is. That's why it would have been unthinkable for a Soviet minister to keep money in Switzerland and his family in Spain, in the Soviet motherland. Absolutely impossible. Here, anything goes. Everyone does as they please. That's why the collapse of the ideology is total. And you know what's most important? The key difference probably from that model. The absence of a positive vision for the future. In the Soviet Union, everything was about the future. Through labor to the stars, we'll conquer Siberia, the Virgin Lands will fly into space, we'll build communism for you, we'll reverse the flow of rivers and so on, construction projects of the century, 5-year plans and so forth. Putin's Russia lives in the past. They have a cult of victory, nostalgia for the Soviet era, for the empire, the idea that we can do it again. And that's it. They don't have this narrative of a bright future. They only look to the past. That's why during Soviet times there was faith in tomorrow, but under Putin there's fear of tomorrow. Tomorrow the idiot might start another war again. Of course they shout, drunkenly blubbering along to those shaman songs, but you'll never hear any talk about a bright future. Just watch some Soviet films. You know, Sashka, in 10 years we'll be doing this and that. And there's none of that in Russia. There's no future there. Everyone has consciously forgotten we don't talk about the future. Yeah, well, there's no future, at least no bright future in Putin's Russia. But there is unfiltered beer. Or more likely, you know, it's like a Baltica 9 and a little bottle of hawthorn tincture to add some aroma to the cocktail. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. First of all, this way we're promoting a pro-Ukrainian agenda together. And secondly, it's not so easy to stay calm in these turbulent times. And a bit of calm analysis never hurts, so go ahead and subscribe. And now our favorite segment. Putin has outplayed everyone again. A yatagan from Erdogan. I've already lost count. Which one is it now? In the back. Or maybe it's not a yatagan, maybe not in the back. Not exactly. But in general, Turkey is preparing to sharply cut its purchases of Russian gas after Trump's demand. Turkey is laying the groundwork for a drastic reduction.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
And the share of Russian gas on the market has already dropped in recent years from 60% to 37%. And after Donald Trump's demands, they decided to slightly reconsider their priorities. Ankara plans to import American gas for as much as $43 billion. In September, a 20-year agreement was signed, which will take effect starting in 2026, and the Americans will supply liquefied natural gas to the Turkish market. There you have it. Plus, Turkey is ramping up its own gas production. Their domestic output will increase from 15 billion this year to 26 billion, and by 2028, that's what they have planned. And there's another important point. The Russian contracts for supplying gas to Turkey, totaling 22 billion cubic meters via the Blue Stream and Turkish Stream, are about to expire. The contract for 16 billion expires this year, and there is no agreement to extend it. Well, Turkey will also buy gas from Azerbaijan. In general, of course, some of those contracts will be extended, but it's amazing how things always get played out like this. But at least now they can sell to China, probably even below cost price. By the way, there was news recently. Putin did reach an agreement with Xi Jinping on power of Siberia too, but no one has even discussed the gas price yet. There you have it. And China understands that the worse things go for Putin, the cheaper he'll be willing to sell his energy resources. Because shutting down wells is very expensive, and reopening them later is also very expensive. So they have to dump the prices. No worries, Russians will pay for everything. Of course they will. And that official who raked in 18 billion is actually a pauper. Do you know why? Because $18 million from the Russian budget are spent on Putin. Guess over what period? Over 18 days. $1 million a day is spent on his upkeep. So 3 billion rubles a month, the budget expenses for Putin's upkeep will reach a new record. That's about $35 million a month. In 2026, Putin got a bit more expensive. Well, just over $1 million a day. Listen, I think even Trump spends less, and he's always flying back and forth, flying out for lunch, playing golf on the presidential plane. He comes back with journalists, chats a bit, then flies off again, comes back again. And keep in mind, Trump flies all over the world. And this bald jellyfish only flew to Alaska once in 5 years, and that's it. Well, maybe a couple more times somewhere else. And even then, it wasn't him. You see? $1 million a day. How? Some Russians have even started to get outraged. But why are you upset, Russians? You saw it yourselves. There are several of those replicants there. Some squashed, smooth one flew to Alaska. An old, shriveled, gloomy one went to Valam. And then there's the one with cheeks like ripe apples. There's a whole squad of them gathered there already. You could fill a whole train car with them and send them around those underground tunnels. Communication. Of course, the budget needs to be increased. Feed everyone, give everyone Botox injections. Attach 5-centimeter heels to everyone's shoes. Naturally, expenses will go up. And Putin called the war with Ukraine justified and timely. He said this while opening a meeting with the commanders of Russian groups in St. Petersburg. But I noticed one interesting detail. At this meeting, as always, Putin is sitting there. He always seems to really like to firmly grip the sturdy table, gently tap his little feet, and nervously fiddle with his heels. Gerasimov is sitting there, Belousov is also sitting there, and on the wall a truly gigantic and impressive painting hangs prominently. I threw it into a GPT chat and it searched for me. Searched. It turned out that it's a portrait of Peter I by Alexei Antropov from 1770, and I realized he's already lost it, his mind is completely gone. To the Urals, right there where our drones can reach, because now he imagines himself as some new Russian emperor. They even ask questions like that at press conferences. Don't you think you're an emperor? No, he wanted to say, I'm the emperor of the galaxy, that's all. That's exactly how he sees himself now. He hung up a portrait of Peter I, and in that portrait Peter is wearing the uniform of the Preobrazhensky regiment. And he's standing by the throne in a coronation mantle with the crown, scepter, orb, those regalia on the table. So that's where he already sees himself. He once said, when answering a journalist's probing question, that he, much like the great Peter I, now has the significant task, indeed Russia itself has the crucial task, of reclaiming and strengthening its historical position and influence. Reclaiming and strengthening. Well, Putin has given orders to protect infrastructure and energy facilities on Russian territory. The most interesting thing is that Putin understands that these facilities cannot be left unprotected. He gave a direct order. So now, probably, in many cities, people have realized that it's not for nothing that half the gas stations have closed, that there are kilometer-long lines for gasoline, and that fuel is being rationed with coupons. In Russia, the country is basically a giant gas station, and now they're giving out gasoline with coupons. Soon it'll be a coupon gas station country, with fuel only available by coupon. And in some places, there's no fuel at all anymore. So Putin comes out and says, I'm giving orders to protect these facilities. He understands that it's impossible. Are you going to pull air defense systems from the front lines? Or maybe you're going to pull those 12 or 150,000 air defense rings away from your own residences? No, let the Russians sit there without gasoline. It's no big deal. So this is just a typical Russian show, giving orders on camera. You can give an order to supply Donetsk with water, and he did give that order. For 12 years, the situation has just gotten worse and worse. They get water once a week. With the same success, he could just as well give an order to end the war tomorrow. You, come to me, Belousov, and whoever else. But of course, he'll take a different path. He'll threaten, he'll talk about how Russia can fight forever, even though the economy there is really falling apart at the seams. By the way, their deficit is already approaching $1 trillion, a hole in the pension budget. $1 trillion. They'll threaten, or Medvedev will be called in to do the threatening, because lately, excuse my French, he's had his fill of making threats himself. You know how? He'll stick his head out the window, like before. Medvedev playing with kids, burying some little secret under a piece of glass, you know, some flowers, candy wrappers under the glass. And then, hey, Medvedev, come here, come on, go threaten everyone. And Medvedev again, and the Anglo-Saxons. Some barking American dogs or whatever, and so on. So Medvedev was just making threats. Basically, if Donald Trump had imposed sanctions, then after a few months, Putin would have he would have had nothing to fight for. There wouldn't have been any money for war. At this point, you know, it almost smells like a Nobel Prize for saving the day here. Not a Nobel Peace Prize, but a Nobel Prize for saving. A Nobel Prize for saving the Russian economy. Well, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's support our 101st Brigade. The details are in the description of this video. Thank you especially for that, always. I see everyone, and I want to say a huge thank you to all of you. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.